translation when the translation doesn't take into account the context and the culture. Now, what I try and do is introduce culture and context. So let me just give you a little bit about my context and culture. So I'm Lewis, and I studied for 6 years at the University of Scranton, clinical rehabilitation counseling. I now currently work for private practice, and I also work at the Geisinger Medical College for the Reach High Pathways programs, where I educate students from 5th all the way up to graduate level on mental health and helping people get ready for careers also in the medical field. I'm also a tech enthusiast. I grew up watching movies like Transformers and Iron Man, and always saw how technology can be used to help people. I always wanted my own personal Jarvis, and it seems like nowadays we're getting there, right, with AI. And I also grew up in diverse environments. So I was born in New York. I moved here to Pennsylvania when I was 6 years old, and grew up speaking Spanish in the house. My dad still doesn't know English to this day, so it's a very interesting situation. But I've done a lot of work in multicultural settings as well. I've worked for the University of Scranton's Multicultural Center. I was the graduate assistant there, and also the graduate assistant at the University of Scranton's Language Learning Center, where I had direct contact with people trying to learn English and saw the struggles of people trying to communicate who they were in a different culture. Now, a little bit about my journey to get here. I started completely wrong. I had a project that I thought was a project, right? I started off building, I spent 7 months building a tool, prototyping, vibe coding as well. And I thought people were going to come and accept the product, buy the product off of vision alone. And the people at Techcelerator explained this to me, and I learned a lot of lessons that what I had wasn't a product, I had a project. And what happens is, that was my first big lesson. A project doesn't become a product until a person is frustrated enough with a problem to then pay for a solution. And that shifted my whole mindset into how I was going to approach this. So I had to go out and understand the problem. So what I did, I went and had over 50 conversations over the 10 weeks of the Techcelerator program. I spoke to counselors, community organizations, clinicians, school leaders and educators, and also life coaches. And what I learned from them was that human interpreters break the flow counseling. Machine translation is a privacy risk, and it also doesn't capture the nuances of culture and context like we want. And the reason it's a privacy risk is that it's not HIPAA or FERPA compliant. And then the only other solution we have to this is family members translating. So that also interrupts the therapeutic flow, the ability for people to share for reasons you can imagine. If a child is translating for a parent, a lot won't be interpreted and they'll be hesitant to share certain things. So there was a common pattern. What I heard a lot is these translation tools and the solutions we have now, they lack the flavor. They miss, like I said, the culture and the context. And so this is a huge problem all across, and there's so many different people who can benefit from translation services and so many different solutions to it, right? And I kind of had to focus, and I had a lot of conversations with my mentor, and he gave me a very powerful insight that Duolingo only started with one language. And I really needed that focus because at first, building in my bedroom and just working on my laptop all day, I really thought, I can build the best tool ever. I can have 150 languages in there with all these different features, and it seems like every week I had a new feature to put into this. But I realized that I needed to ground my focus and really pick a market, master that, and build a strong foundation to then potentially expand. But we needed to narrow it down, really focus in on what we could do. here you can see a little bit of that journey. So I spoke with, at first I thought my market was all therapists. Then you can see I moved throughout to interpreters, life coaches, community groups, and then I finally landed on schools. So Optimust Intelligence is going to school. And why is that? Because schools have their hair on fire with this problem. A Scranton school board leader told me that they're throwing jello at a wall and hoping it sticks. And in the Scranton School District alone, they're understaffed, under-resourced, and there's over 50 languages spoken in the district that don't get the translation services that they need. Additionally, there's a clear funding pathway for this with Title III in the Every Student Succeeds Act, where funding is set aside to ensure this requirement of equitable language access. And I even got market validation, support from a Scranton school board leader that said when this pilot is ready, we would love to test it out and we can connect you with investors. And this was the clearest sign that I could do something here and that this is something that will really help me. And so now on to the actual tool and the idea behind this. So it's real-time translation with 5 dimensions of insight, and you'll get a look at that, so I won't get too much into that. There's a de-identification layer to make sure everything's private and HIPAA compliant, and there's also English learning insights, because one thing that really stood out to me that I didn't learn until I started talking to schools is that we can only translate so much. We can only accommodate so much, but we also need to help students on the pathway to learning English. So that was something I didn't really consider. And here you can see some numbers. So my total accessible market, my serviceable addressable market, and my service obtainable market. And really big numbers, right? But the idea is that there's a clear problem and there's a market for it, and people need this help. So now on to my competitors. So human interpreters, machine translation, and enterprise language platforms that are currently being used in community organizations today. So again, human interpreters, they're accurate, but they disrupt the therapeutic flow, the communication flow. Machine translation, like I said, it's inaccurate, it lacks context and culture. And then some of these enterprise language platforms, they're not built for the specific use case of schools. They're more for general meetings and are specifically helpful in online meetings. But what Optimust Intelligence tries to do is be culturally aware, emotionally tuned, and privacy aligned. So here's what I've built so far. I built connections with school districts, a culturally tuned glossary to inform the artificial intelligence I'm using, and that's 1,000 entries over 107 languages. And I've also found a validated first customer base. So here's just a quick demo of the prototype. So I would say, hola, bienvenidos a todos. Estoy muy nervioso, pero también muy dichoso para estar aquí con ustedes hoy. And then it would translate it. So here you can see, if you don't know Spanish, hello everyone. I'm very nervous, but also very lucky to be here today with you. And then you can see the 5 dimensions of insight, right? So emotion detected, culture notes, risk assessment, and potential focus. And this is all to help the person communicating in English and the person communicating in whatever other language it is to feel more confident in their communication, that they're getting everything across. So some of my key lessons from the Techcelerator program were to treat business and treat developing a product like a science. You have to go out there and form a hypothesis and then build the evidence to support that hypothesis. I needed to find a niche and master that. And another key lesson that I want to share with you today is that fall in love with the problem, not the solution. So at first, I really wanted to stick to my initial product and how that was formatted and all the different features, but I learned that maybe my version of solving that problem isn't what people need in their workflow right now. So I had to really understand the true problem, not just the problem through my narrow lens, and then build for that, iterate for that. And another thing is that the right people, like the people in this room, will support you if you show up and do the work. So what's next for me? I want to continue to follow up, secure some of these school pilots that have shown interest, continue doing customer discovery and understanding what do we need, how can I iterate. I need to build a multidisciplinary team because my background is in mental health counseling, and there are a lot of gaps that I still need to fill to truly be able to run this business and help others. And I'm also seeking investor support, and the next step that I'm focusing on is competing in the Techcelerator, or no, the Tech Bridge business plan competition, where I can really iron out some of these details and see how it shapes up. So I'd like to thank all of you for being here. I'd like to thank Don and Larry and Mary for showing up over those 10 weeks and giving feedback, giving me the knowledge that honestly I would have never gotten if I didn't join this program. Thank you to my girlfriend for supporting me throughout these 10 weeks, and even before that, she's seen me have so many different ideas throughout ever since I think I discovered the ability to produce a product. I've had so many different ideas. And for my parents for allowing me to not be in the house so often as I'm trying to chase this dream. And if you're interested in supporting, you can follow me on my Instagram. I have some really interesting videos. I'm doing a series where I build out this glossary to capture people's culture within this glossary to inform AI better. And you can also follow along on my journey throughout on my LinkedIn. And you may have seen in the beginning that I said optimism is a must, and that's kind of how I started out. As an optimist, as a person who believed that people would come if I build it. But now the slogan changes to optimization is a must. We need to do this the right way, the efficient way, and we need to have the evidence to do that. So thank you for helping me find that.